China is an authoritarian state. It seems there's no denying this. They have heavy bureaucracy. For example, I went to get a document notarized the other day, and the time it took was over 45 minutes. But worse than that, they needed 7 signatures from me, 7 from my wife, because she might be the one to go and pick up the document when it's ready. They needed to see, copy, and photograph my passport, both the passport and the visa pages, twice. And they needed a photograph of me and one of my wife, in case she's the one who goes to get the document when it's ready. Because the document related to my savings bank, they also needed a copy of the bank savings book. Yes, they still have savings books here in China. And they needed 2 copies of the document that they were notarizing. And you begin to think, when you're in this process, that it's a never-ending process. It's never going to end. China has heavy censorship. We can't go online and say what we want. We can have our posts removed if they're political, if they're medical related, unless of course we're doctors or experts in the field. If they contain hate speech, sedition, or anything that the country deems as misinformation, such as Tiananmen Square, which of course we all know is misinformation in every Western media outlet. China has surveillance systems so large that they are best described as mass surveillance. They also have compulsory civic education in schools, which means everyone is brainwashed into thinking the CPC is great for the country. They have thousands of police officers in every city. There's no doubt at all for people who believe this is bad. China is a terrible place to live. Except it isn't. As a result of the bureaucracy, there's never, ever a bank error, one way or another. And because of the censorship online and in media, China has a harmonious society. There are very few people find a need to protest anything, and when they do, their protests are acknowledged, their grievances are noted, and a nominated government or company official is tasked to respond within a certain time. No need to get violent. As a result of having tens of thousands of police on the streets, everyone everywhere knows who to talk to and where to get help from when they need it. As a result of this mass surveillance system, there's virtually no crime in any city, town or village anywhere, and people can walk safely around at night. And as a result of civics lessons, lessons in Marxism, Maoism, Dengist thought and Xi's leadership, every college and university student goes into their bachelor degree knowing why their country does what it does, and almost every one of them comes out hoping to contribute to society in ways that will help their country, their community, their family, and themselves in that order. There's no point in having the world's most stable family if that family lives in an unstable, unsafe, unhealthy, or impoverished country. So there's no shame in putting the country first. It's not ultranationalism, it's not even nationalism, as it's often reported in the West, but it is common sense. Now, almost every American I know says they live in the greatest country in the world, and for them that may be true. It certainly isn't true for the people they've invaded, murdered, impoverished, and displaced over the years. America is one of the most ill-informed, or perhaps I should say misinformed countries in the world. They need to have websites dedicated to fact-checking. They have the largest prison population in the world, and yet crime is still rife, so punishment's not working. At the same time, they have the largest policing budget in the world, so that's not working either. And almost every American and Canadian that I know is living in a state of anxiety. They don't know if they'll be homeless next month. And according to the American Psychiatric Association, 43% of Americans are suffering daily anxiety. And then the police, who are employed to serve and protect, managed to kill 1,364 people in 2024. That's approaching 4 people a day. And people there still tell me it's the greatest country in the world. Currently, there are people being arrested on a daily basis in the USA for exercising their rights, free speech and others. And as of 2019, the police are protected if there is probable cause for an arrest. What does that mean? So let's say a person is speaking at a meeting or a rally and the police don't like what that person is saying, and I'm citing a real case here which I've linked in Ohio, where a councillor was arrested for speaking out against a sheriff. But there are many more examples I could have used. But as people try to stop that person speaking, they tussle with each other, and the police deem that an assault has occurred, and then they arrest for that assault. The reason for the assault was that people were trying to prevent free speech, but the Supreme Court in 2019 decided that if there was a reason for the arrest other than the speech issue, then the arrest is justified and the police are protected. So defending your right to free speech is arrestable in the United States of America. One of my subscribers has mentioned that the US gets crazier every day, citing that one old lady was arrested in Tennessee for wearing a shirt with a sign on the back saying Jesus was an immigrant. This seems to me to be the kind of thing an authoritarian state might do. I've never met anyone in China, or even heard of anyone who's been arrested for their clothing choice, although I have heard and seen people being told to dress more appropriately, if it's inappropriate. Now, here's a totalitarian policy that you're probably not going to believe, but I assure you it's true, or at least in the interpretation held by legislators in Tennessee, it's held to be true. It's not yet tested in a court, so it may change, but in the state of Tennessee, a law has been passed, and I want to thank a follower, Core Powers, for pointing this one out to me. The law states that any representative who votes against a Trump policy can be charged with a felony. I'm really not kidding. They have an authoritarian president, and the state government of one of the states has made it an offense not to follow his orders. So much for democracy. Imagine being elected by the people in your neighborhood to represent them, and then being told, if you don't vote the way the president wants you to vote, you're going to prison. That's really happening. Looking around the world nowadays, I'm seeing similar situations in all the media I read. I'm finding that China isn't authoritarian at all, especially when compared to others. In Australia, a new anti-hate speech law has been enacted, but no one knows what hate speech really is. Apparently, we could go to prison for shouting, "Stop killing babies," because some people might get offended by that. And the police or a magistrate might deem that it was hateful to say so. What's worse is that mandatory sentencing has been introduced, and showing a Nazi sign will get you a guaranteed 12 months in prison. It hasn't been determined yet if the flag of Palestine is a symbol of hate yet, but if you were to drive past a synagogue with this in your car, you can be sure that will be deemed a hateful act. And this is the flag of a nation that is recognized as a state by the United Nations. However, if you drive past the Chinese embassy with the flag of the terrorist group, the East Turkestan Islamic Movement, you'd have no issues whatsoever, despite ETIM being designated as terrorists by the United Nations. Their flag has been flown in Canberra several times and supported by politicians. Now, there's a serious problem with what constitutes a hate symbol when it's open to that kind of interpretation. The Sydney Morning Herald just a day or so ago was suggesting that mandatory civic and citizenship lessons should be incorporated into the school curriculum. Apparently, they report, this comes amid a splintering of social cohesion, rising anti-Semitism, and declining trust in democracy. It also seems that for 20 years, students have been graduating without studying Australia's legal and democratic systems. They don't understand national values, the Constitution, or voting, which, by the way, is mandatory in Australia. Wait a minute. The Sydney Morning Herald has criticised China for having civics lessons, and now they want Australia to mandate them? That's strange. China has courses, and the world prints stories utilising words like brainwashing and control, and yet here we are in a democracy where, according to many experts, it ought to be mandatory. Well, what's wrong with that? This has all been brought about because of what's being termed a rise in anti-Semitism. Here's the thing. If someone is throwing firebombs at a synagogue, that isn't anti-Semitism, that's arson, which is already an offence. It could even be attempted murder and could indeed be murder or at least manslaughter if someone died as a result of it. Why does a government need a special law to protect special people? The simplest way is to use the laws that already exist. If I throw a rock at you, it shouldn't matter why I throw that rock. I'm guilty of an offence. End of story. That's what happens in China. Everyone from the most vulnerable to the most prominent is protected by the same laws. Another thing China gets accused of all the time, but there's never been any evidence presented that it's actually happened, is this claim that all data is under the control of corporations and platforms and channels online in China and must be shared with the dreaded CCP. Of course, the CPC has not done this. It's the law of the land, and the laws are written by the National People's Congress, made up of elected delegates from the communities. However, the CPC does implement laws, and the only thing they've asked for is that the data is stored in China, so that if it's needed for a court case, a criminal investigation or another legal matter, when applied through the courts, the data must be provided. Now that sounds a little bit like what every country in the world has or should have. However, it seems some don't. Now the UK is playing hardball with Apple, issuing a demand in a legal form to Apple Incorporated to create a backdoor on their phones so that they can look at our data. Huawei doesn't have a backdoor, so now it's blocked in Australia, banned in the US, except in the Pentagon apparently, where it was needed for security reasons, and it was removed from the UK 5G system where it had been installed. Luckily for me, I don't have an Apple phone because I don't want the British government looking at my data here in China, and that's how sweeping the government's laws will be. And it isn't just Apple. Under the Investigatory Powers Act of 2016, all private companies are compelled to provide information. Doesn't that sound familiar? It's exactly what they accuse China of doing. And while we're on that topic, if anyone knows of a single case when the CPC, CCP or whoever has forced any organization to provide private information to them, please let me know in the comments. I'm sure all of us would love to know about it. I just never heard of it happening. To be honest, the more I read, see and hear of how legislation and policing are continuing in the Western world, the more I realize that living in China, where we have clearly defined parameters, where we know we can walk safely in any region of any city without any fear of getting mugged, raped or murdered, where we have no one telling us that it's okay to have men in girls' changing rooms, where there isn't a single group of people trying to hurt another group of people, where gays, lesbians, transgenders and anyone else have exactly the same protections as everyone else, where we can walk up to a police officer secure in the knowledge that the officer is there to help us and isn't likely to shoot us in the face, where we can have an argument in a parking lot and know for a fact that the person we're arguing with isn't going to pull out a gun and shoot us in the face, and where we can walk around every inner city without seeing huge sections of society so mired in poverty that the only way to live is in a drug-induced stupor in shop doorways, tents, and if they're lucky, the back seat of their car. No. If China is authoritarian, then I like it. If the West is the land of the free, please don't offer me that. I don't want that kind of freedom. And for goodness sake, please don't, as has been done in dozens of countries already, come to China with guns and bombs to rescue the Chinese people. They don't want it. Neither do I, my family, my friends, or my neighbors. Thanks very much for watching my little rant on authoritarianism. I will see you next time. Don't forget, press that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, check the subscribe button if you thought you were subscribed, and I will see you next time. Bye for now.